You are listening to Latinx America, a podcast focused on highlighting catalysts who are using, leveraging, or creating technology to help our community achieve more. With your host, Adriana Flores Ragade.
Our guest today is Ari Barreto. They/them is a Latinx, Chicanx, queer, non-binary person who works at Textio, an augmented writing platform that uses predictive analytics to show how people will respond to the language you've written. We capture their story at the Latinx in Tech event hosted by the Caper Center. I hope you enjoy their story, energy, and passion for moving our community forward.
Ari, it's a pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure as well.
Thank you so much for being with us today. We are at the Latinx in Tech event hosted by the Caper Center. So we're really excited to be meeting emerging leaders such as yourself. And why don't we start by learning about your personal journey into tech?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's funny because I've always been tech adjacent, right? So I started my career in grassroots organizing for LGBTQ homeless youth in Chicago. And then randomly I got picked up and I was doing fashion and celebrity PR. And I got this job and everybody around me was like, oh, it's so luxurious, it's amazing. And we would work with celebrities that would be a part or sponsor organizations and work directly with tech companies. And after I decided that wasn't the career for me, I went to employer branding. So I would help tech organizations attract more people from underrepresented groups to their teams through content marketing. So I was never working explicitly in tech, but I was close to it, right? With celebrities or with campaigns that we used to build. And I found Textio, which is the company that I work at now, and it's augmented writing. And what it does is it basically predicts how people will respond to written language before they ever see it. So like a job post, for example, it can analyze the language in a job post and predict how likely people will respond, even the gender of the person that you might hire, right? So companies are using this machine learning software to attract more people like us, right? To be able to hire more equitably. So it's been an interesting kind of whirlwind of a journey, but I can't imagine working anywhere but Textio, to be real.
But you were doing campaigns since you were young. Were you inspired by someone? Did you have computers at home? How did that come about?
Well, yeah, I think it's, I think computers at home. I remember my brother, one of my older brothers, like grabbing scraps and trying to build a computer like on a motherboard. So I was always really interested and intrigued by it. But I grew up in a really low income, like lower socioeconomic, mainly brown and black neighborhood that like access to technology was not there. Like we didn't have computers in schools, right? Like that wasn't a thing. We were barely sharing textbooks. So like I was always intrigued and fascinated by it, but it felt really distant. And I think when I started learning more about the different types of technology that could help more people, right, have access not only to education, but opportunities, that was really the most inspiring piece for me, right? It was like technology being used for good, technology being built by people like me. And that was something I never saw, right? So for me, it felt so far away, but as soon as I got to be like, oh, there's other Latinx people like in tech that are building this amazing and doing amazing work, like how do I become a part of that? So it's been a lot of different segments and parts, one, it being really far away, but I think more visibility, the more that I started learning about specific companies and what they were doing, then it was really like, okay, yes.
So you were working on celebrity PR, you transitioned. Now you're working with cutting edge technology, machine learning, artificial intelligence, some of the things that you mentioned. That's what everyone's talking about right here, right now. Right?
Yeah.
So what's your role at the company?
Yeah, so I'm in business development, I'm in sales. And it's so funny, every time I say that, there's always like a reaction. Like people hate salespeople. They're like, oh, they're so terrible, da da da. So like I jokingly say, like I always try to prove to people that I'm not that terrible of a salesperson. And it's true, right? You get cold emails and cold calls, but really the type of sales that I do with clients is like talking to the heads of diversity and inclusion, heads of talent acquisition, recruiting, right? And being like, what are your goals? What are your values as an organization? What do you fundamentally care about? And is there a problem that my software can solve? If not, we don't have to work together. It's okay, right? So I work primarily in Silicon Valley, helping companies hire more equitably through language. So being more intentional, not just, of course, with job posts, but even emails. Like, I got this ridiculous email from a recruiter that is headquartered here in San Francisco. And she said, "You would be a great LGBTQ addition to our team." Now, for those of you that don't know, I'm non-binary. I'm also Latinx. I use they, them pronouns. And like that type of tokenization, the exotification, right, of my identity is just so dismissive. This community overall, the tech community, has so much work to do because a lot of people just don't know what words they should or should not be using, right? So Textio, another part of it is also for recruiting mail, right? Being able to predict how likely candidates will respond to your cold in-mails or sourcing emails. So it's really making sure that, you know, as an organization, are we aligned in terms of our values? Do we fundamentally care about these pieces? And then two, do you have a problem that the software can solve for it? And chances are, most oftentimes it's yes. Companies do want to hire more equitably.
So you are now in tech and you're doing business development, which actually I consider it more of relationship development.
Yeah.
When I think of business development, I think of you're building a relationship, as you mentioned, and if it works with a company and you're able to dance together, then you dance. But if not, then you know you've at least learned something from those conversations that you've had.
Totally.
Emerging technology. How can others listening to you kind of follow your footsteps? Because you went from a place of being very passionate about caring about homeless issues and other things happening in your community and things that were impacting you personally to now you're trying to make a difference for different communities, because we know that here, not just in the Valley, but all over the country, recruiting underrepresented communities, what we would consider marginalized communities, because there are times when it's not us that didn't want to come in.
Right.
It's that, we're not even in the picture.
Right.
So how can others follow your footsteps?
I think the one thing that changed my career fundamentally was having mentors, right? And a lot of the times, I can think of either, way back when, whether that was teachers or professors, and then more in my full career, people that believe in you fundamentally as a person and are willing to spend time with you. And a lot of people in our community, a lot of times when we talk about advocacy, I'm always like, what are you doing with your time? And what are you doing with your money? Right? Can you actively give if you can't sign a check, right, to organizations, look at the ways in which that you are supporting what you might be paying for with your dollars, right? Are you supporting businesses that are owned by women of color, trans people, LGBTQ identified folks? And if you can't support at a large donation, at least examine those pieces. And then two, time, right? So how we build and sustain community, I think. And, I always tell people, reach out to me, reach out to anybody that you see that you're like, hey, I love what you're doing. And most oftentimes, if you ask people for a little bit of their time of wanting to know either school or skills that they were able to develop, or can I shadow you in your job, right? Putting yourself out there, it takes courage, it takes vulnerability. Yes, and those things right now when, collectively the world is telling you that you might not exist or you're not important are very, very hard to do fundamentally. So I think self-care has a ton of places and pieces in this, right? Making sure that you feel comfortable and sound in yourself to be able to then have the courage and be vulnerable and ask for either support in these different types of areas. And the other thing is be scrappy, right? I had no resources, at all growing up. And when I got that job in fashion and celebrity PR, even the job that I didn't necessarily want, I'll never forget that boss. I asked her how to write a press release and she hung up on me. And I had to figure it all out in a time crunch, right? And a lot of the times, Google is your friend, find the free resources that are out there, be creative, and don't take no for an answer. I think one of the best pieces of advice that my mother told me was that, this world is not ready for you. This world does not accept you or is not ready for all of the pieces that you have to offer, but you cannot take no as an answer. So that resiliency that is needed, even after being courageous, even after being vulnerable, is so important. So be scrappy, lean on your community, and even if you're listening to this, reach out, right? You can find me. My name is Ari Barreto. So we gotta use each other for support.
Just listening to you, I just got chills, so I just wanted to let you know. But I know that this is probably in people's minds because it's in mine right now. But what celebrities were you working with before we move on to your life in tech?
So legally, I'm like 1 year away from it being able to like actually say. But the two people that I can say was like Angela Bassett and Salma Hayek is who I will say.
Oh my God, you work with, I love her.
She's amazing.
And lately she's been doing just some really creative, I would say out of passion type of work too, and highlighting issues that are really important to our community. So I think, great. We'll talk about Justin Bieber next year. What resources are out there that you have benefited from, or that you've learned about that you wish you would have benefited from, whether it's classes, people, or just real life experiences that you recommend?
It depends on where you want to go. Truthfully, like a huge resource and like really building a foundation in community for me in tech has been Lesbians Who Tech. They offer scholarships not only to attend any of their summits. There's one in San Francisco, one in New York. And then they have communal like meetups, and those are people on a technical side, right? Like people in whether in machine learning and software development, learning different types of code, as it relates to GDPR, security, information security, and then all the way then to the business side, right? There are so many people that I would use as resources, right, within that community, and I'm so grateful for Leanne and that entire team. But that even if you can't attend the conference itself, to learn from other peers, any of their meetups or things that happen regionally, I would definitely check out. They always have, whether that's, boot camps or organizations that they work with that will have like fellowships for specifically Latinx people or people of color that want to get into tech. A lot of people will pay for us. We should totally take advantage of that. But yeah, I would start there, but depending on where you want to go really within, whether that's media, whether that's tech, healthcare, there are a ton of different resources. I feel like I have like a link depending on the industry. So yeah.
Well, let's talk about AI. Like if people were interested, because you're now in a different world.
Yeah.
If people wanted to go in that direction, what are some of the resources? And I have to say, I met some of the members of Lesbians Who Tech at the Grace Hopper celebration.
Yeah.
And they were so welcoming and so embracing, and they had the best giveaways.
Yeah.
So, but let's talk about AI, like if they were interested in that specific field.
Yeah. So I would look at, on the technical side, I feel like I can't speak to so many of the, but like Code 2040, there's so many like organizations that have, that are specifically focused on getting people from underrepresented groups into tech. So whether you want to do a boot camp, Code Academy, I learned HTML, CSS, JavaScript on Code Academy alone for free. That is a free resource. If you want to get started, go check it out. On the sales side, if you were interested in selling technologies, I would do like a first landscape of like what problems within AI are being solved, right? Is it about human capital? Is it about cryptocurrency? Which parts of the pieces are you most interested or most get you excited, right? And then dive in a little bit deeper. And I'm trying to even think there's another, I'm forgetting the organization. There's one that's based in Seattle that does a ton of work specifically with AI and folks of color in Seattle. But I will get back to you.
I think looking for those local resources as well as for those national resources, like anyone with access to a computer can go to Code Academy.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
Or .com.
.com.
And do some self-training, right?
Yeah.
So that's a natural resource. And then look here in your communities. I know Oakland hires, and there are a lot of different wonderful organizations. So finding those in your communities or creating them, because people are trying to understand, or are actually now more than ever understanding the importance of technology and what it means for local communities. So I think if you don't have something like that in your community, try to leverage some of the national resources and form something in your community, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Resiliency, especially, when we do community events like this, right? Being able to reach out and have connection with one another is so, so important, because a majority of the times when I look to people, whether that's like Aubrey Blanche or Katrina Jones, people that are doing incredible work within communities, they're more than willing and welcome to take time to help in any which way. So, and absolutely, if you can't find it, like, build it, create it. You will have backings from so many people, and it starts with having connection, right? Having one another. So
That makes a big difference. Let's talk about your journey. What have been some challenges, whether they're professional or personal, that you've had to overcome? And what helped you overcome them? What advice do you have for those that could be experiencing some of those same challenges?
Yeah, so I'm Mexican and I'm Puerto Rican, and I'm also trans and non-binary specifically, right? I'm gender fluid. And those three things in a sentence, there's like an oxymoron, right? People like me, they're like, do you exist? And I'm like, yeah, look at me, I exist, right? And it was difficult for me coming to this realization that I was neither a woman, neither a man, because especially being raised as a Latina woman, so much of my femininity or the affirmation of my femininity misguided me, right? I think of like if being Latina was, like a grade or a course, I had passed. Not only like with flying colors, I got extra credit. I was so good at it. You could find me salsa dancing, bachata dancing, just living my best life, flipping my hair with my red lipstick. And I realized, right, that it wasn't for me, right? I realized that so much of now I think of it more of like performance was for other people, because that's what people had expected of a Latina. That's what so much of my upbringing, right? I was raised to become a mother. I was raised to become a wife. And I wasn't raised to have a career, right? And that wasn't because my mom, or my parents didn't want me to. My mother was always like, you got to have a separate bank account. You have to be independent. You should be able to leave. So like all of those pieces about being independent, I learned about. What I didn't learn about, right? Because my native tongue is so gendered that I didn't have the words to describe how I felt. And when you don't have the words, right? Because Latinx didn't exist until a few years ago, right? And when you don't have the words to describe yourself, coming to that realization is that much harder, right? So when I came out as non-binary to my parents, they had asked me questions that I wasn't ready for, right? They were like, oh, you hate your body. And I was like, no, my body's really cute, like, right? And they're like, oh, you want to become a man? And I'm like, nah, I don't. And so much of gender specifically, and it's not exclusive to trans people, right? Gender expectations within our community are so prevalent, whether that's masculinity or femininity, and we all experience some type of expectation, performative of that, right? And that plays so much into our authenticity and how we show up in workspaces that it's so unbelievably difficult, right? To be able to say, like, I'm going to be me unconditionally and unapologetically, right? And my advice, one, is that resiliency is a skill, right? And if you can develop resiliency, if you can realize and understand that, like, a majority of the like, when I talk about transphobia, the thing that, like, sexism, homophobia, and transphobia all have in common is that they're expectations of us because of our bodies, right? And that being able to deconstruct that, like I was talking about this actually with a friend. She saw a job. She's a director of engineering at a really well-known tech company. And she was like, I think I'm going to start looking for jobs. And she saw a job posting that said, she will be responsible for, she will do X, Y, Z. And she was like, I can't even work there because they're not even inclusive here. Like, they're probably not inclusive in their workplace. And I'm not even trans, right? And for us, coming to liberation, coming to being able to show up authentically takes so much work. And if I were to give any advice to somebody, it would be that self-love, self-care is a radical and revolutionary act, and that we should do it and practice it more often in spite of the expectations that might be of us or be put on us, because we are more. Even like people are like, biology, and I'm like, well, biology, if any good biologist will tell you that there are more than two types of people, right? And that extends to so many other pieces. And yeah, that's it, I think.
No, thank you for sharing. And how does one develop resiliency? Because that comes up a lot. I mean, it came up in the last interview I did, and it comes up in every other interview that I do. How did you develop it?
I think it goes back to the expectation v. reality, right? And you can look at some of the actions that you do on a daily basis. Am I doing this because I truly, fundamentally want to do this? Do I believe in this? Do I care about this? Or am I doing this because this is what's expected of me? Am I doing this because I'm going to get compensated for it? Am I doing this because, and the why, right, of your actions can tell you a lot about how much is maybe crafted, right? How much is expected, and how much is because you fundamentally want to do them. And most of the times, like when we ask ourselves what we want, some of those pieces, the answers are the hardest things. They take courage, they take vulnerability, they take so many pieces that require us to have difficult conversations, that require us to be uncomfortable, to live in the unknown, right? With not having maybe a backup plan or not having enough resources, it's the risk. And if you want to learn, or you want to maybe even assess where you're at today, like ask yourself why you are doing the things that you are doing, right? Ask why you might and I think about this, like a lot of my friends right now are having kids, and they're like, do I have a gender reveal party? They ask me. Like, now, why am I having this gender reveal party? If I'm looking at you, Adi, and you're telling me gender is a construct and also like a system of white supremacy, like, do I have a gender reveal party? And the short answer is like, there are so many other ways. What's the intention of something like a gender reveal party, right? It's to celebrate this new life, right? It's to make sure that this person, whoever they are, that they come into love and community and dignity and respect, right? And there's so many other ways that you could show all of those pieces that aren't because it's the status quo or the expectation, right? My nephew was just born, and instead what we did is we had a party, and everybody wrote down things and aspirations that they hoped for this baby, right? So I hope that you're not afraid of. I don't want you to deter or shy away from this. I encourage you to be XYZ, right? So it's everybody within Marquitos' little community now, right, that are giving affirmations. There's other ways that we can celebrate human life and one another if we just examine the reason why we are doing things, and then are able to be like, how much of this is systemic? How much of it is the expectation? And how much of it is like, are these my values? Are these what I fundamentally care about? And then let's try to imagine a world. Let's do something different. Let's do something that we want to do rather than what's expected of us.
Thank you, Addie. Let's go back to your personal and professional journey. We talked about things that you've done professionally. Who has influenced you the most and why? And also on the personal side. I mean, you're very passionate. I love that. I love the fact that, we can have this conversation, that we can have this conversation in person. And And I'm just learning a lot just from sitting here across from you.
Thank you. I think, so personally, so I was telling you all, I grew up in a predominantly Black and Latino neighborhood, and I was gang affiliated at the time, and my mom actually got a second job, so we would basically pay rent for a studio in an all-white neighborhood because the education, the public education was better.
Was it in Chicago?
Yeah, it was right outside of Chicago. So,
Outside?
yeah. So, it's like southwest side, where majority of the Latinos live. So I went to this all-white neighborhood. I was still gang affiliated. I was still selling drugs. I was a very bad kid. I would smoke weed every day. I was like not on the right path, right? Like I was in this group of 10 women, and I was the only one to graduate high school without a GED, without pregnancy, a felony, overdose, like so many pieces that impact, right, lower socioeconomic status, like neighborhoods, like, and I had no intention of going to college. I was happy if I lived past the age of 18. I didn't care, right? So when I was in this all-white neighborhood, there was this teacher, and he was like, "You're just such a little like hard ass," he would tell me. He was like, "You're smart, like, and your parents don't know that you're doing all of this because you're getting good grades." He was like, "What's the deal?" And I was like, piss off. Like, I like would run away. I like didn't want to have anything to do with him. And I started getting some of my tests back, and they were Fs. They were like Scantrons, like old school, and it would be like the pens, or he would like mark them. And I was like, I had never failed anything in my life. And I like came back, I was like, what is this? And he was like, I don't know, I guess I'm gonna have to like talk to your parents at parent-teacher conference about all the things that you're doing. And I was like, this teacher is blackmailing me on my grades. But now I look at it, right? And you know, it was right before, I was like, what do you want? Like, what do you want from me? I don't understand, white man, like leave me alone. And he was like, you have to join speech team. And I was like, what, like debate? He was like, no, speech team, where you where you create a monologue and you perform it. It's forensics. So you grab whether that's poetry or prose, or, you know, you could do stand-up, all these different categories, and you had to do it. And I was like, okay, so if I do this, then you're going to leave me alone. Then I get good grades again? And he was like, yeah. So I did it in high school. I was pressured into doing speech team so I wouldn't fail. And I was really good at it. And that funded all of my scholarship money that I got to go to DePaul. And it was it changed my life, right? Like I wouldn't have gone to college without this guy, right? I was second.
His name?
Thomas Fuller.
Okay. Mr.
Yeah,
Fuller.
Mr.
Thank
Fuller.
You. Shout out to
yeah,
Mr. Fuller.
Mr. Fuller is incredible. He's great. So he changed the course of my life. Like I had no expectation to do anything spectacular. Like I had no expectations of myself, and he changed that fundamentally. So having him as my English teacher, having him as my speech coach, because he ran the speech team. There's now a plaque of me in my high school, right? Like because of speech, which is hilarious. And I had, and when I think of like my professional career in life, like I still talk to Thomas Fuller actually very often. He's like on his like fourth or fifth kid with his wife. They're happily ever after, in Chicago. But I think now for me, especially like moving to Textio, Karen Snyder is the CEO of Textio, and she's somebody, and Jensen Harris, they're both co-founders. They're somebody that I say is a true ally. And this word is used a lot, right? Allyship, and you're a good ally, and I'm a good ally, and we like pat each other on the back for it. But what that really means is showing up for somebody when it's not convenient to you. It's showing up and not getting rewarded for it, right? A lot of people, like I was at a conference and this white woman was talking about like showing up and making spaces for like brown and black people. And then she said, well, now I'm hosting all these spaces, so if I ever need anything from them, I'll just call on them when I need them. I'm like, that is not how allyship works, right? It's not transactional. There's no expectation of somebody when you do something nice for somebody else, when you show up and you are actually their ally, when you are in a higher position of privilege and power and you use it to help people. And Karen Snyder and Jensen Harris are two prime examples of people who are actually allies. Karen Snyder, she has her PhD in linguistics from UPenn, and she actively uses her privilege to talk about why they, them pronoun is actually grammatically correct. Right? She uses and she flexes her PhD to be able to be like, actually, no, they, them has been used since Shakespearean time. Oh, by the way, it was recently added to the dictionary. Here you go. Right? Like, there are so many ways in which, like, Kieran advocates for me when I'm not in the room, right? If somebody misgenders or mispronouns me, she's the first. And she's one of the highest positions in this company, right? And Jensen Harris, on the other side, like, will actively not work with vendors if they're all white cis dudes. And we'll be like, I would love to hear what you're doing about this, because like this is not acceptable. And as a white cis dude who gains nothing from that, like that is allyship. That is true advocacy, when it's not about getting, you know, a badge or a sash. It's not about an applause. It's literally about doing the right thing when it is most inconvenient or uncomfortable for you and doesn't benefit you directly. So like, those are two people in my professional life now. Like Kieran is somebody that I look to, you know, she sits only a few seats away from me at work, but that I get to show up. And as somebody who's queer, non-binary, and Latinx, like in tech, that doesn't happen. That doesn't happen very often. So like, I get to show up to work unconditionally and unapologetically and grow, right? She'll push me to grow and be better and be like, what do you want? Because anything that you can want, we can create. And that type of mentorship is something that I will forever be grateful for.
Sounds like you're in a very good space right now.
Yeah. And we're hiring.
Hiring, putting it out there.
Yeah. Textio is an incredible place to work. We just simple stuff like our bathrooms, like they're not legally, the American Disability Association in the state of Washington has to require you to have binary bathrooms. It was a law that was created so that way women didn't have to go to a second floor because women were now in the workplace. Unfortunately, it's outdated. But our bathroom signs, we were trying to find like gender neutral bathrooms, and like my team was like, all the bathroom signs that exist, they're so ugly. They just have people in dresses and not all women are wearing dresses. Like there's all of these signs look terrible. So my team, a senior designer, my head of branding, my CTO, Jensen, they took time to redesign the bathroom sign. And we got a custom bathroom sign that's like, regardless of whatever the sign says, any person of multiple gender identities or expressions are welcome to use this, right? And then now it just has a toilet and a urinal and a wheelchair. So you know all of the things that you need to know about a bathroom, what it has in it. Can I stand up or can I sit down? And like that type of like, I don't know, the ish that Textio does in terms of like allyship and showing up and creating space is something that I have never seen before, and I'm super grateful for it.
Creating a climate of inclusivity. So if people wanted to find out more about jobs or actually showing up for you, because I think a big thing for our community is supporting each other's efforts, and you are in business development, relationship development. How do they get in contact with you, specifically for allyship and to learn more about your company?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Adi Barreto. I'm the only Adi Barreto that uses they, them pronouns on LinkedIn, so you can find me pretty quickly. I'm also on Twitter, Adi_Barreto, so connect with me. If you're interested in a career at Textio or want to learn more, you can connect with me, but the best way to see our open opportunities is just on our careers page, and we are hiring. We actually just got the second floor of our building, so we're doing another build out, so we will be doubling. So if you are looking for an opportunity, check it out, and then send me your resume. I'm more than happy to forward it to our recruiters.
Thank you. And if you could go back to, the beginning, not just the beginning of your career, but the trajectory of your career, has there been advice that you've received that has been very valuable to you or completely useless?
I have gotten so many useless, like the most useless piece of advice that I got was from a white woman who told me that I just needed to say things and then they would happen. And I was like, that's not how that works for us. Like, we say things and we either gaslit, or we say things that we want and we're like, oh, don't dream too big, or like, oh, don't do that. Like, are you sure? We're questioned all the time when we say things that we want because of who we are, right? Like, oh, are you going to leave your family behind? Oh, you're going to move to a new city for a job and leave. It's not that simple. We can't just be like, let me send this out real quick and this will happen. Like, that doesn't exist for us. But one of the most, I mean, I have it also, there's like I'm thinking of like pieces of advice, books. Gloria Zundala has an amazing book called Borderlands. If you haven't read it, I highly encourage it. She's Chicana, so her family's mostly from Mexico, but she's been living in the United States, and she talks about what it's like to live, and she's lesbian, to talk about what it's like to live when you are too much or too enough, or not enough, excuse me. Like in the US, everybody's like, oh, you're like a little spicy pepper. You're just a little hot, little jalapeno. And then you go to Mexico and they're like, your Spanish is broken, like muy americana, like you're so, like everything about the US, nothing about, yeah. And you live in this world where you are too much to live in the US. It's just too much. And then you go to Mexico and you're not enough. So you live in the border, you live in between in this world, in this dynamic. And the book is written so beautifully because she's like, my Spanish is broken because I live in the United States now, but now I get to write, like, so her sentences will literally flow from English to Spanish and back into thought in English, and it's incredible. And there are a few pieces. There's one piece that I actually have tattooed on me, and it was, no fui buena ni obediente. I wasn't good nor obedient. And for me, right, living a life where I can be my true authentic self is, and do so unconditionally, right, unconditionally around me, and unapologetically, right, that, if anything, like, has been the foundation of who I am, the way in which that I show up to places. And this was advice that my mother told me, as I was saying before. Like, my mother told me years ago when I was a child, right, that, like, this world wasn't ready, and you can't take no for an answer. You just can't.
Well, that's a great way to end our conversation today. Once again, we are at the Caper Center's Latinx in Tech event. We're very excited to be here. You will hear some background noise, lots of applause at times. So please be patient with us. But thank you so much for sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you.
For sharing your advice and for being an ally and a role model for our community. We appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Ada's story is significant because it really addresses issues that have sometimes been very hard for our community to talk about. But since the Latinx community is very diverse in itself, it's extremely important that we begin addressing everyone's journey with respect and with an open heart and an open mind. I was honored that they chose to share their story with us and really hope that Ada will join us again in the future. Okay, let's move on to our key term for this episode. As I mentioned last week, we're highlighting emerging technologies included on an article posted by Oliver Kahn, where they actually have a full list of emerging technologies that are really excited about. And this list was developed by a team of experts and scientists, so it was curated before I'm sharing it with you. And so the scientists are excited about more helpful digital helpers powered by artificial intelligence, such as Siri and Alexa. And according to the article, the latest technology powered by AI will mine the cloud and outline various arguments on topics that are important to you without prior training. Um, for instance, professionals might be pointed to already curated research to help them come up with a solution or treatment faster. So it's really exciting because it's almost like they're going to be reading our minds in some way based on everything that we've inputted. In Addie's case, when we were having the conversation, they outlined how augmented writing allows you to see the future that your words create. Like the example that they gave regarding whether or not a potential employee would respond to a job posting based on the language that you use when you create it. So it's really interesting how all of this is kind of coming together and the impact that it's going to have on our lives in the future. And actually, AI is already having an impact. I attended a movie screening of a movie called Bias last night. And it was interesting because the last part talked about virtual reality and also artificial intelligence, and how some artificial intelligence tools that are being created are really impacting minority communities, because the computer only knows the information that is shared with it, and that's how it comes up with algorithms and things and predictions that, in cases like the one in the movie last night, really have a deep impact on incarcerated um, communities or incarcerated people of color. One of the things that I really love about producing Latinx America is that I always learn from my guests and get really excited about emerging tech. Um, However, we need to really be part of the conversation when tech is being built in order for us to contribute, um, and also ensure that this emerging tech will be helpful. And like I mentioned, it's not going to be biased against communities of color. Um, and with this, I'm going to end today's episode. And don't forget to leave a comment or a rating for us on whatever platform you use to listen to our podcast.
Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Latinx America and on Twitter at America Latinx, or email any questions or ideas to latinxamerica@gmail.com. Gracias y hasta la próxima semana.